got some trees in the foreground. We got this whole area right here of flowery marsh off of this deck. There's a post here, or a rail here, standing on someone's deck. But looking out over the marsh. So all of this area here is all light. And it's pretty consistent in terms of value from here to here. I mean, if you take a look at what's going on, this is basically dark value from here to here. This is a little bit darker, but basically we're dealing with a value of about 60–70% in this area here. The trees are dark value. We've got light holes between them. All of this area here is this is mid value back here. This is light value. If you actually squint, the value here and the value in the sky are probably the same. So if you break this down, we have dark value framing light value with a mid-value horizon. Okay, and it's the fall, so there's going to be some colorful changes in the trees and in the foreground, all of this area right here. So, to get started, again, this is going to be a lesson in terms of how to mix the paint to achieve the result. And I thought that might be interesting. It was suggested by a couple of people that they want to understand. They like to see the palette and how I'm mixing the paint. So I'm going to take and I'm going to do that. But first we've got to sketch this out on the paper. So again, I'm using a light pencil, probably a 2B. And we're going to come over here and we're going to end up literally taking a measurement. Essentially, I'm going to use my finger. I mean, halfway is about here, about right in this area here. So I'm a little less than halfway at my horizon on the lower side. So if I do the same thing, halfway is about, let's say, here to here. So my horizon's going to be down somewhere in this area here, my horizon line. So the first thing we're going to do is to just run a rough line across here from left to right, and just above that area where your eye is, about somewhere in not quite dead center, because I don't want to do that, but I'm going to just create a very simple shape. The shape is going to be curved at the top here, come over here, and come down this way here. And then to help the horizon, I'm going to do the same thing over here. We're going to come around this way and then sort of curve up a little bit and off. This area might be just a bit higher. Okay? So this gives us the structure that we're looking for. And the land mass is not really straight, but it comes toward you as it moves from this point to the left. It comes toward you. So we're going to end up doing something like this. Okay? Now, what also happens here is that we've got a relationship between I'll bring this down so you can see it, this area and this area. This is a little bit wider from the top to the bottom, a little narrower. So I'm going to just take that and I'm going to say it's basically doing a slight angle going up. Now it's going to be curved, but it's going to be doing a slight angle going up. So if that's my spot here, I'll come up a little higher here, and I'm going to just give myself something that looks like this. Okay? And then we have a situation over here. I'll bring it back down. Our trees are here. So I'm going to just rough in a limb, tree trunk over here, and I'm just basically following what's going on in the photo, in the reference that I'm looking at. And it doesn't have to be exact. It's going to come down here. I I've got a straight line coming across over here, which we may or may not put in. But it comes down to about this point here. And again, I'm going to rough in my trunk. Okay? And what I'm doing, if you notice when I do my trunk, the trunk I'm doing is not straight. I'm curving it a bit. So we want to create some interest in the tree trunk. So I'm making a curve there, coming back down from this point to this, making this a little straighter as it comes down. And as the trunk comes down to the base of the tree, it gets a little bit wider. Now I've got floral kind of stuff going on over here, so that's basically what's happening here. And this whole area becomes almost a little bit more than halfway over. So if you start that, if you figure that this is my halfway point here, I'm coming over here. And I'm just going to, in order to do this, I'm just going to give myself some round areas, curved areas, just at the end of this. And my other sort of limbed area is going to be here. My tree area is going to be here. Come up in this area, and there's a lot of holes in this area here, so it's just rough. Come over here. And in order to support all of this stuff over here, we've got limbs that are coming off the trunks, right? So this is the trunk of this. Got a huge limb coming off here. And basically what I'm doing again is not moving it straight. I'm just making the main limbs here for a second. I'm up this way here, and we have a limb that's coming off of the structure about at this level here. And my limb, what I'm really actually trying to do here is to create these limbs so that they're interesting shapes. There's interesting shapes that are going on in here. I probably don't really care too much about whether or not the tree itself, I'm following it accurately. The only thing I'm really concerned with is whether or not these shapes here inside are all interesting shapes. And I don't see too much in the way of any limbs, but we're going to put one in here to help support this coming down, and up in this area here, because you'll probably have some limbs there. So for all intents and purposes, this is my rough, my drawing. Now I do want to create holes in this. I want to see a lot of sky through this. So I'm going to put my leafy matter in these areas, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of holes, so I'm looking at the sky between them. Right, so there's a big area over here that's all sort of going to be filled in, but we'll do what we can to do that. Up in this area here, we're seeing through a lot of this stuff. Okay, in the same way with over here. This is just rough. I'm just roughing this in. Now, the way I'm doing this is just, I'm creating these kinds of shapes. That big leafy pattern here, big leafy pattern there, big leafy pattern here. You can do them round, or you can do them concaved. It doesn't make any difference. Convex, concaved. In most cases, what ends up happening is that you want to try to look at that and create the illusion. This is going to be an exercise of painting characteristic shapes to emulate what we're looking at. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in this area back here where all of these trees are, and they're simply shapes. I'll take it, what I'm talking about is this area right here. I did this as one big shape, by the way, but quite frankly, we're going to end up painting that. We are going to paint it as one big shape, but we're going to end up giving it some character to, so that it has the definitions of these characteristics that look like trees in the background. But again, the idea here is to create this depth of field that we want to create in here, and we want to keep this thin enough right in this area here. And all of this stuff here is going to be flora and fauna. You're going to see a lot of this kind of stuff going on. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at the palette. Again, we're looking at our palette and what we're going to do to mix our colors. So my consistency of my palette is the same. It just goes from the blues on this side, reds, red yellows, yellow browns, and then my yellow ochres down in this area right here. So the first thing I want to do is to move the palette over here. I'm going to end up flowing my sky in. And my sky is going to be light, and we're going to do a basic sky, so we're not going to do much in regard to the sky, except maybe we'll throw some clouds in, but I don't want to get overly dramatic with clouds. So what I'm doing is I'm going to wet my paper. I probably should stay away from the edge of this, but I'm going to wet the paper where I want to flow the water in, okay, the clouds. And I'm going to come right down, because this is all going to end up, doesn't make any difference what I flow down here in the area at the bottom, because I'm painting light. We're going to be painting light to dark. Okay, so we'll just wet the paper and let the gleam of the glisten. Here's the paper. We'll saturate the paper. Now you can see the paper's got a lot of bright areas, a lot of glisten on the paper, and that we're just allowing the water to saturate into the pigment of into the fiber of the paper. And we're going to take some time and let it just dry out a bit before I start to put water in there. But when I do that, I'm going to end up taking my, I'm going to end up taking my 1-inch brush and work with that first to start. But I want to make sure my brush is clean. So what I'm doing is right now, before I do anything, is I'm wetting the brush, and I'm actually physically trying to make sure that the brush is clean by taking all of the pigment out of the paper. I want a fresh look. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to mix. Let me move this out of the way for a second. Okay, I've moved my painting out of the way so that you can see what I'm going to end up doing to mix this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to understand what kind of a sky I'm going to be working with. So it's going to be basically a light sky with a little bit, the clouds are a little bit on the coolish side. So there's a cooler blue. So rather than cerulean blue, I'm going to start off with cobalt blue and bring my cobalt blue into the center of the palette. Now I'm just picking up pigment, and this is fairly thick. This is, I would suggest buttery, a little bit buttery. But what I want to do is I want to come in here and wet it. Okay, I want it to be not buttery, but I want it to be a little looser than buttery. I want it to be more like, let's say, if we start off with water, tea, milk, cream, and then butter for consistency, so it'll give you some idea. This is more like maybe tea. tea to milk in that area. Okay, so I'm just starting out with a little bit of cobalt blue. And I'm going to take just a touch of my alizarin crimson and put it in here. This stuff up here, by the way, that you're looking at is mold. That's all mold on that. If certain paints will get moldy, that does it. That's a opera. My alizarin crimson and opera, any of those kind of paints will get into getting a little bit on the moldy side. I'll just wash that off later. But here's the consistency. Okay, I took a little bit of alizarin crimson and dropped it inside here. Cobalt blue and alizarin crimson. Here you go. Alizarin crimson cools it down because it's got some red in it, but it cools it down. I know it's got, and then a little bit of my cobalt blue. All right, so I'm going to move this over. Bring back my painting. Put it in place. All right. And now you'll notice that the glisten or the gleam is off the paper. It's matted a little bit more. It's wet, but I can take and I can do this. Add a little bit of water if it's up at the top. I can put this in, this consistency in this here. Okay, now it's a little bit on the dark side. So all I'm doing now is just taking water and bringing it down to the horizon. And that's it. I don't want to do anything else to it. That's my background. Now I'm going to come down. Now if I take this here, I want to come down, and I just used one color just as a base to show you how I mixed it to get it in there. I'm going to let that set up a little bit, and I may come back in a bit. Well, I probably will do this right now because there are certain areas that I want to get a little bit lighter. So I'm taking the water in my brush, pulling the water out of the brush, and I want to just lift up a few areas here to make it a little bit lighter. A little water, take the water out of your brush. Call it, these are wisps in the background here. Nice, and as we go in the background, as we get farther away, I want this lighter. All right, so all I'm doing is I'm taking my brush, I'm dipping it in water, I'm taking the water out of the brush, come back in here, and just softly lifting this out. Mixing paint. Here, I'm going to put, here's where you got to be careful because I'll get a blossom if I don't. You got to be careful about letting that water go, the back runs underneath the edges of the paper as well. Just, this is where it was watery. Just want to lift it out a bit. Okay, so I've got a sky that has some interest, and it's got a, I put this in not horizontally, but at a slight angle coming down from my upper right to lower left. I want this to go back in space. So it's a little bit darker up here, a little bit lighter back down here. That's what I was looking for. So let's go in here and talk about how to handle this area down in here. This nice light green. Light green and sort of like a yellowish feel over here. Again, let's go back and take a look at mixture. What we're going to do, you just take this out of the way. put this back in. We'll take some water. I'm going to take yellow ochre and mix it loosely, watery. And we're just going to use yellow ochre this time. I'm going to set this up. So this is loose and watery. Probably more like tea than water, but it's going to be loose and watery. Okay, so we put this back in, and we're going to end up with water, putting my yellow ochre in here. And we're going to get lighter. Here's my photograph, if you can see that. Taking my yellow ochre, and we'll just simply make this lighter in the background. And as we get forward, come forward, we're going to end up getting darker. Now, the way I'm going to get darker is I'm going to add some blue, my cobalt blue, a little bit of cobalt blue to this. So let's see what I did. You see what I did? I took a little bit of cobalt blue and I'm mixing it right in with that yellow ochre. And I'm still keeping it wet and watery. And I'm coming down here and I'm going to start to make this a little bit darker. It's going to be shadowy, more shadowy, and it's going to be brighter over here on my right, and a little bit darker over here on my left. So I'm just adding a little bit. Now what I just did is I took up a little bit of, changed it up a bit. Let's see what I did. Took a little bit of cobalt blue, added a little bit of cerulean blue into my yellow, changing it up a bit. You know, see that? Still wet, still like tea, tea-ish, if I may. Okay. Now this is all going to get dark down here, so I'm going to just come in here, and I'm going to start getting a little bit deeper blue. I'm going to add deeper blue by getting my cobalt blue, add some cerulean blue to it. Okay, yellow ochre inside, and I'm going to get more. Now I'm going to create a heavier consistency. Can you see what I'm doing here? My yellow ochre, cobalt blue. I don't want it as wet. So more like, say, milk or cream. And I'm painting this. I'm going to start to paint this a little bit more vertically. Now I just added, what I did is I just added some alizarin crimson to it to get it a little bit browner as I come down here. And I'm using vertical strokes down in this area here. I just added some burnt sienna and cobalt blue. I want it thicker. A little bit of burnt sienna, cobalt blue, It's on the brown side, right? All of this variation is a variation of all of these colors. And this is a little bit, this is dried out, it just dried out on me down here, but that's okay, we'll just leave that alone. Can you see this now? So what happens is that all this stuff up in this area right here is all nice and dark. Well, we're going to end up getting that even some of that darker by coming over here. And I want to get more solid, more pigment in my brush when I mix. So I'm taking a nice amount of my burnt sienna over here, and I'm going to end up coming in here with my French ultramarine blue, and it's getting more pigmenty. If you can see what I'm talking about, it's like 75. This is more like butter, I guess. If it is more of a buttery consistency, or probably a heavy cream consistency, not quite buttery yet. All right, now this is wet, right? So with this pigment, here's what I'm doing. I'm taking the water out of the brush. I got a lot of pigment on my brush, but I'm touching it here and there. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to make it darker over here. The more pigment you use, let's change up the, yeah, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll change up the color. We'll still maintain the value, but I'm going to change up the color a bit. I'm going to take my cerulean blue and I wash out the brush, and then I'm going to pick up my yellow ochre, cerulean blue, nice and thick, and I'm going to put some heavier pigment in here. Now I'm going to do the same thing with even a good heavy shot of combination of my Pyro Red and my blue. I want this to be pigment, not water. So we're going to do it on the red side. So I'm going to take a little bit of Pyro Red, mix it in with my burnt sienna, and I want to create areas where it's going to be browner or redder. The more pigment you use, here, I got some Naples yellow here. I'm just going to use straight Naples yellow, and you can basically mix that Naples yellow by using a little bit of red with yellow ochre. But here's my point. I don't want it to dissipate like water. I want to show some variations in what's happening here, but I want it to stay pretty much where I put it. So the more pigment you use when you put this down, the more it's going to stay in place. The more pigment you put down, the more it's going to stay in place. Same way with all of this stuff out here. Let's take some of these areas over here. are going to be, some of them are going to be darker. Some of them it's going to be lighter. So we're going to take my horizon line over there. Yellow ochre. A little watery yellow ochre over there. Maybe some, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I just took my cadmium, I'm using cadmium orange right here. Just going to put a touch of cadmium in here. Okay, I'm going to let that set up for a bit. This area here, I'm just going to come across. Some of the area is going to be light, so I just took my brush, and all I'm doing is I'm going to take some of this stuff and just bring it across, so we have a variation in darks and lights coming out here, going across here. All right, so that's off in the distance. Adding a little bit of red, my pyro red and my yellow ochre to mix up that cadmium orange. Essentially, is basically what it is. Okay, some of the trees out here are going to be reddish. So if I take my pyro red, I add yellow ochre to it, I should get a nice, not quite cadmium orange, but you'll get something similar. Okay, and if I'm dumping that into water, so okay, so here's what I'm going to end up doing now. I'm working with dirty water, so I'm going to have to get some clean water. But what I want to do is I want to create here, I've got this mixture that's over here that's drying out, and I want to create some light areas. So what I'm going to do is get some fresh water to do that with. Oh, I have some fresh water now that I'm going to be working with. And what I want to also do is, I'm letting this dry a bit because I want to spritz it. I want to take my spray bottle and I want to spray into that area. But I want to spray lightly. It's almost like using salt. Some of you guys have used salt to create snowflakes and stuff like that. So I've got this area right here. Let's see what happens if I just do a little. I'm not sure if this is dry enough to do that spray, but spritz it here. See what happens. It's a little bit too wet, I think. It's not going to really take. It's hard to say. Has to probably dry out a bit more. Okay, so wet. Actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this angle brush. And what I'm trying to do now is to create some of this leafy stuff, all this foliage that's in the foreground. But I want to force this back in space more. my trunk of my tree is right here. Bring this down. Okay, and I have this tree trunk here, which I'm going to bring up. Okay, in other words, I pulled the water out of here, and I brought this up and lifted the water into the area where this tree trunk is over on this side. Trunk of the tree is in the foreground. Okay, and this limb is going to be the same way. That's going to be in the foreground. So it's a little bit of water is what we're doing. Just taking a little bit of water and putting it in where the trunk, because I painted the background, and I wanted to create that illusion of a little bit of a trunk. And now I'm going to take some water, and maybe I can, too much, we'll see what happens. I want blossoms. So this is the intent here, is I want blossoms here. I don't, a lot of places you don't want blossoms, but I want those backgrounds and those blossoms to appear over here. And as this dries out. And I'm just taking clear water here and taking the tip of this angle brush. Okay. And creating some linear work here. Just coming down very lightly, putting the water in with the tip of the brush. You know, this all takes place if and when it's the right consistency, and that works there. You don't want it to fill in. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create this leafy structure that's here, but the stems, you know, the stems of the flowers as they come up. And you can do this. You can only do this when it's the right consistency of wetness and dryness. Okay, so this is nothing but water. Then I'm coming in here and I'm essentially lifting off. Right, coming in here and lifting off. I'm just looking at my reference material. I'm not following it exactly. I'm just simply saying, okay, let's make this area a little bit lighter here, and that can be done with this angle brush. I think we can do this with a. I'm going to pull out a dagger brush here, or a round brush. Let's see. Here's a small dagger. We'll use this one here to give you an example. Wet it. Again, okay, so see how wet this is in here? Just let me pull out some of this to lighten some of it up here and there. With a bit of tissue here and there, you can, interesting what you can create. So this is a little bit too dry here, you can't do it here, but you can sort of do it in this area here where it's wet. Okay. So, what did I say? This was too dry, so this is a good time that you, with something as dry as this, I should be able to go in here and create some stems that are on the light side, because that's all. This is just nothing but clear water. Just dipping it in water, bringing it in. Just dipping it in water. So what I'm trying to do is vertical stems for these flowers. And I got some light, some of those areas are light. Let's put some dark areas in. Let's use a combination of my cerulean blue, my cobalt blue, and my burnt sienna. This is just pigment. A little bit more burnt sienna. Now the idea here is not to overwork this. Right? You don't want to necessarily overwork it. What you want is just enough to make the statement. Just enough to say, look, this is what's going on. Okay, now I'm not going to do it all right now. All I'm doing is a little bit of this stuff over here right now, just to so you get the feel for it. This is all usually done at the end. Okay, but I just wanted to set this up for us so that we had something that we can work with. Okay, so this is going to be our field of flowers. This stuff back here. So what I'm going to do here is create this. We've got the track. That goes out. And what I'm doing is I'm lightly taking my brush. I've got more pigment than water on here. I just got a lot of pigment on here. This is still damp. And I'm just lightly touching this. Just want to get this general feeling to help go back in space a little bit. Just creating this illusion heck here of a sense of distance is what we're trying to do. A sense of distance. Now, what do we have here? some lights and darks. We've got areas in here that are going to be darker. What I want to start to do is to create my leafy patterns up here in my trunks. So this is going to be darker. So my trunk, this is all going to be dark against light. And again, I'm using my limbs, but I'm not necessarily using I'm not necessarily following them exactly. I'm trying to keep this structure as loose as possible. And I'm putting this in, this skeleton sort of like okay, so I'm just lightly putting these in. My tree trunk here. We'll fix this all up. Just okay. My pencil fell. And so we got this going. And we have a couple of ones coming down here. Right, from there, so to take care of that. Now we're going to end up, now this was all, here's my color. What I did is I basically took my French ultramarine blue, my burnt sienna, created this nice dark like that and put it in. That's how I did that. Okay. Let's just take some of these as this dries, and we're going to put some dark back in here. And all I'm doing, these are wisps. I'm not doing much except to create this sort of illusion of lights and darks that are in here. Scrape some of this stuff in to create this illusion of see-through. And again, staying away from a lot of that. And again, the same thing that's going to happen, I'm going to put some darks in here too. All of this area up here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bigger brush to do that with. And we can probably use this nice fat round brush that I'm going to work with. And here's what I'm doing. I'm mixing up. I'm going to start with a lighter value. So I'm taking my yellow ochre and mixing it with my cobalt blue to get a light gray. Because these, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and start to do some darks. Right, I use a little, put a little bit more water in here. I'm going to end up probably putting some darks on top of that as well. It's sort of like scuffled in, I guess, if nothing else. I want holes. Okay. Large brush just to create my trees, and this is basically dry brush effect. This is all dry. Here's my consistency. It's more like cream, not quite butter yet. More like cream. Okay. And we want to create the holes. We want to make sure that there's holes in the tree that we're seeing through the foliage to the sky in the background. And so that's going to be important, all right? So the way to do that is to scrape, arbitrarily just scrape here and there. Take the brush load of pigment, maybe a little bit more water here and there, because we want this. We're going to end up having this darker over here. And some dark in there. Yellow ochre. We want this darker. Alright, so combination of my French ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, nice and dark. Again, French ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Now we're talking about the consistency of butter. And we're making leaves. Again, consistency of butter. Maybe a little bit of strong pigment's dark, but I'm taking just basically burnt sienna in here and putting some burnt sienna darks in here. Create. I don't want. I want to say this. I don't want a flat. I don't want a flat black or a flat dark. I understand that we're basically dealing with silhouette here, but what I prefer to do is to create some variation in my values in here. I am looking for an interest. And it may happen or it may not, I don't know. But you want variety. And I'm holding my brush fairly loose and just letting the tip of the brush apply the pigment. Okay, so just a matter of keeping this thing active. This is all butter, buttery consistency. And this is not pine trees, so we're not doing a pine tree. Okay? These are deciduous trees. It's all broadleaf. Okay, so what I want to do is to lift off I want to lift off some of this if I can. This might be too dry. Just a few things here. I might have to go back in a little water and touch it up a bit. I have tissue, paper towels I'm working with. Okay, so I can see my sky through my trees. The way I'm going to create a little bit more of this is to come in here, and here's, now look, I'm wetting this up. Notice what I'm doing with this brush, wetting it up. I want to create, this is all tree. All right, enough of that. Flour. Okay, now I gotta get some clear water. Here's the danger of that, is that it should have been all masked. Okay. All right, so now all we're ready to do is, do the final. And the final is going to be a matter of going in here and see if I can get wet that up a little bit. Wet some of this up a bit. And we're going to end up with a fine brush, and end up with, we're going to do some linear work. And then if I have to lift anything out, I will do that. So, we're letting it dry a bit. Now this is a rigger, or a script brush, I suppose. Lightly, what I'm doing is I'm taking just the stuff that I have on my palette. See this watery stuff? Right there, all of this watery stuff? Okay, a little bit of that, and I'm just feathering it. I want to create some texture in here. Not going to bother putting in that rail, I don't think. If I do it, it's going to be on top of this anyway, so I want to just, what I want to do is make sure that you have a feeling of floral stuff going on over here and there. what I'm doing is I'm just picking up some pyro red and combining that with my yellow ochre. Okay. This is that here and there stuff. So when I get into areas like this that I figure are too dark, you want to just drop some solid colors. And usually if it's, I'm dropping some solid, just taking some yellow ochre here and putting it into this area, but that probably is going to dry it a lot lighter, and may not work the way I want it to work. Alright, so let's get back to limbs, twigs, because all of this stuff that's here needs to be connected. And what ends up happening is that as you come out here, the thinner these are, the lighter they get. You know, you go from a trunk to a limb to a branch to a twig, and what you need is nice light stuff that's happening. This is what helps make this a more interesting piece. So all this stuff here that's going on, how, see all these splattered dots here? It helps to tie those all together. Because you have to have, they can't just be floating in space. They have to have something connecting them. Or else it's not going to look right, right? We get some real dark in here. Again, the same thing over here. We're going to put some really super dark up here. try to get some darks and lights. What I'm doing is I'm basically, oh, I hope my head is not, shucks, my head is in the way. I'll have to edit those out. I tend to bend over this stuff when I'm doing it, so forgive me, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so we need a real distancy kind of feel back here. So I just graded down a bit. And okay, so let's see how that looks. So that's kind of cool. We just let it go. Probably going to be, I'll leave it alone. I'm not going to do too much with this. Just leave it. Just do something here. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a linear look. Slight linear look over here. And a line back here to define that. Okay, so probably I'm going to let this dry, and if I want to brighten up some of these areas, you know, I could, if I wanted to, I could come back in with a pencil and do something like that, or lift out some of the stuff that we were working with. Could always lift out, I suppose. I didn't use my fan brush. I could have created some of this stuff with a fan brush, but I don't want to do it. I don't usually use fan brushes except for specific functions or looks. Let me see if I can just take a little bit of water. Let me kill some of this here. Break that up a little bit. That's about it. I'm going to end up killing this if I don't stop, so What I just did is I just took some of my lavender, which you don't have, but you could probably make with a little bit of cerulean blue and Naples yellow, combine it, or even yellow ochre. Just to give this a little bit more of a variety of looks. A little bit of that, and then maybe some Naples yellow. There you go. I don't know if that did anything. Just darkened it a bit. A little bit of yellow ochre. Okay, guys. That's it. That's the lesson on mixing the paints to drop into position and doing a marsh scene overlooking some foliage. If I really put some strong dark in here, that would really probably go back, but I think I'm not going to play with that right now. This is just like I said, it's a lesson that we're working with, and let me see if I can scrape some of that a little bit more. No, too dry. Could have scraped it a little bit more if it was a little wetter. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for being with me. There's our work for the day. And enjoy your painting sessions. And I enjoyed being with you. Have fun painting this. I think you should do it again. That being said, I'm your host, Tony Visco. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey guys, I decided to put in the rail over in the front here, so I'm going to end up doing that right now with flat brush. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to lighten the top. So I'm I have a flat brush here, a little small flat brush with a chiseled edge. And what I'm doing is I'm taking water and just going in here and making this lighter. This is going to be the top of the rail. Okay. I'll just turn it around, and then it's easy for me to work vertically on this. So I took the clips off and just decided that this is the easiest way to do this. So there's the top of the rail. Now I'm going to put the dark area underneath that. Why I decided to do it, I think it needs a little bit more darkness. That's why. So to make it dark, again, I'm going back to how do you make things dark? My French ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, combining the two. And I'm going to start here. And make the rail a little darker. The bottom of this is right here. I don't want it black, I just need to get it so that it has a feeling of darkness. And you know what? No biggie, if we ruin it, we ruin it. We'll just do another one. This is all wet. There's a lot of water in my palette. Now I could, essentially I suppose what I could do here is I could use a ruler and put a ruler in there. But I think what I'm going to do is do it this way. I'm going to just change this up a bit. Add some cerulean blue to this. Make it a little grayer, greener grayer. And I'm following that line. And it doesn't have to be accurate. It could be rough. Change it up a bit more, maybe a little darker here. What I'm doing is just glazing over the dry area. With a dark pigment, and it's basically probably what can be considered a gnocchi at this point. Not tea, not water, but more of a milkier consistency. Alright, so there's a rail, and we have a post. Say about right here. Okay. All right, and got some dark areas and light areas. These are basically just this is wood, so we want to make it look like wood. Gives me a rail. I think I'll make it a little bit. No, that's thin enough. I'm gonna leave it alone. Probably could have made it a little bit wider. Dark area. And then what we can do just gives us a reference point going forward. Darkest right near you. I mean, I don't know if that does anything more to it, but it just gives us a rail to work off of. Do I do something else? No, we'll leave it alone. Okay, so that's it. Just wanted to put that in after seeing it stand there for a while. I just thought it needed a little something else, and this one needs a little bit deeper up there. Now the other thing I did here, which you might see, may not see, is I took a little penknife, or actually a little blade, and I picked out some lights. Now what that does is it obviously damages the paper when you do that, so you can't paint over it because you can see some of these scrapes that I put in here already. But nonetheless, that's what I did. I'm going to scrape some of this to give me a lighter impression. I'm using the flat side of the knife, the blade, to give me some highlights, okay? And I wanted, see what I'm talking about? Like that, little wood highlights. You can do it when it's wet, but if it's dry, you can't. So, there you go. This is the top. Flat top, a little darker under here. This is shadow. So we want to, let's get some. Okay. All right. That'll do it. Okay. And maybe some darker areas here and there. to mix it up a bit. Okay, that's it. Thank you. And again, have a nice day.